A poor girl borrows money from a heartless millionaire to save her sick mother, but what he demanded next will leave you stunned. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. The rain was pouring down over the city that night, drenching every sidewalk, turning the streets into silver rivers that reflected the pale glow of street lamps. Claire clutched her thin coat tighter around her shoulders as she rushed across the crosswalk. In her hand, she carried a crumpled envelope that held the last remnants of her savings. She had been to 3 banks already that day, begging for a loan. But each rejection left her heart heavier. All she could hear in her head was the beeping of the hospital monitor, the shallow breaths of her mother lying in the intensive care unit. The doctor had told her that without an urgent surgery that would cost more than $30,000, her mother would not survive the month. Claire was a waitress at a small diner, working double shifts just to cover rent and food. $30,000 might as well have been $30 million. But for her mother, she would not give up. She had heard whispers from her coworkers about a private financier, a man who lent money without collateral. No one knew much about him except for one thing. He was unimaginably rich, the kind of man who made others nervous just by walking into a room. His name was Alexander Grant. Claire hesitated as she stood in front of the tall glass tower that bore his company's name in gleaming silver letters. Her shoes were soaked, her hair clung to her face, and her cheap coat dripped rainwater onto the marble floor of the lobby as she stepped inside. The receptionist gave her a doubtful look, as though she had wandered into the wrong world. And perhaps she had. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked sharply. Claire swallowed. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "Please, I need to see Mr. Grant. It is urgent." The woman behind the desk arched a brow, clearly unimpressed. But before she could dismiss Claire, a deep voice echoed across the lobby. "Let her through." Claire turned, startled. There he was, Alexander Grant, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her entire yearly wage. His presence filled the room with authority. He looked at her not with kindness, but with a sharp curiosity, as though trying to decide if she was trouble. Claire lowered her eyes, clutching the envelope tighter. "I am sorry to bother you, Mr. Grant, but I need to borrow money. My mother. She needs surgery, and I have nowhere else to go." For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the faint hum of the building's lights. Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. Most people begged him for business deals or lucrative contracts. No one had ever come to him this drenched and desperate, asking for money, not to make more money, but to save a life. He finally spoke, his tone calm, but edged with something Claire could not place. "People do not usually come to me for charity. Do you understand what it means to owe a man like me money?" Her throat tightened. "I do. I will work as many jobs as I can. I will pay back every cent. Please, she's all I have." Her words carried no polish, no clever bargaining, only raw desperation. And in that instant, something flickered in Alexander's eyes, something close to intrigue. He gestured for her to follow him toward the elevator. "Very well. Let us discuss the terms." Claire's heart pounded as the elevator doors closed. She had just stepped into a world far beyond her reach with a man whose intentions she could not yet read. Little did she know, this desperate plea for her mother's life would tie her fate to Alexander in ways she never imagined. And this was only the beginning. The elevator ride was silent, except for the faint hum of the machinery. Claire kept her eyes on the floor, clutching the damp envelope of her meager savings, as though it could shield her from the intimidating presence beside her. Alexander Grant stood tall and unshaken, his reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator as sharp and commanding as the man himself. Claire felt small, fragile, like an intruder in a world that did not belong to her. When the doors slid open, she followed him into a spacious office high above the city. The view through the glass walls stretched across endless skyscrapers lit against the night sky. It was breathtaking, yet it only reminded her how far she was from this world of wealth and power. She stood awkwardly near the door while Alexander removed his jacket and placed it neatly over the back of a chair. "Sit," he instructed, his voice calm but firm. Claire obeyed, lowering herself onto a leather chair that seemed too expensive for her to even touch. Her wet shoes squeaked faintly against the polished floor. Alexander sat across from her, steepling his fingers as he studied her. "You need $30,000, he said evenly, as though repeating a line from a contract. "That is not a small sum, and you are asking me, a man you have never met, to hand it to you without hesitation. Why should I?" Claire's throat tightened. She pushed the envelope across the desk, the bills inside barely more than a token gesture. "This is everything I have. It is only a few hundred, but I will work as long as it takes. I promise I will repay every cent. My mother's surgery cannot wait." Alexander glanced at the envelope, but did not touch it. Instead, his piercing gaze remained fixed on her face. "I do not operate like a bank. I do not give out money without terms. If I lend you this amount, it will come with conditions. Do you understand?" Her hands trembled in her lap. "Whatever the conditions are, I will accept them." He leaned back, his tone measured, his words deliberate. "Very well. I will give you $30,000. In return, you will agree to be my wife." Claire froze. She was certain she had misheard him. "Your wife?" "It will be a marriage in name only," Alexander clarified. "A contract. There will be no intimacy, no affection expected. I require a wife for appearances. My family and my board of directors are pressuring me to settle down to prove I am capable of stability. I have no desire for a real marriage, but I do need someone willing to play the part." Her mind spun. This was absurd, unreal. Marriage was supposed to be about love, about trust. And here he was, offering it like a business transaction. But then she thought of her mother, the beeping monitors, the pale, fragile hands clutching hers in the hospital bed. The doctor's words that every day mattered. Claire swallowed hard. "If I agree, my mother will get the surgery immediately." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing her resolve. "Yes, I will transfer the funds to the hospital tomorrow morning. Your mother will have the best care money can provide." She closed her eyes briefly, fighting the storm inside her chest. The thought of signing away her freedom to a man like him was terrifying. Yet the thought of losing her mother was unbearable. She opened her eyes, her voice trembling but resolute. "Then I accept." For the first time, Alexander allowed a faint smile to curve his lips, not one of joy, but of satisfaction. As though he had just closed another successful deal, he pulled a folder from his desk drawer, sliding it across to her. Inside was a detailed contract, each page filled with legal language that blurred in her tear-filled vision. "Read it carefully," he instructed. "It outlines every condition. You will attend public events with me live at my residence and play the role of a devoted wife when required. In private, you may live your life as you wish within reason. The contract will last 1 year. At the end of that year, our arrangement will be dissolved." Claire's hands shook as she held the pen he offered. She wanted to scream that it was wrong, that it was cruel, that no human being should have to barter their life like this. But then she thought again of her mother's faint smile, her mother's fragile heartbeat. With tears brimming in her eyes, she signed her name. Alexander took the papers back, his expression unreadable. "Then it is settled. You are now Mrs. Grant." The words landed like a weight in her chest. She had saved her mother, but at what cost to herself? Little did Claire know, this contract was only the beginning of a storm that would change everything. The next morning, Claire awoke in a room unlike anything she had ever seen before. The bed was enormous, dressed in sheets so soft they felt like clouds against her skin. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a view of the city skyline that looked more like a painting than reality. For a brief moment, she forgot the weight of the previous night until she turned her head and saw the signed contract neatly placed on the bedside table. The reality of her choice hit her like a wave. She was no longer just Claire, the struggling waitress. On paper, she was now Mrs. Grant. She rose quietly, trying to shake the unease in her chest. She tiptoed into the kitchen, only to stop short. The kitchen alone was larger than the apartment she had shared with her mother. Shiny appliances hummed softly, their purpose foreign to her. She opened a cabinet, searching for a simple mug to make herself coffee, but the shelves were lined with crystal glasses instead. "Looking for something?" Alexander's voice carried from the doorway. He stood there in a pressed shirt, every detail immaculate. Claire nearly dropped the mug she had finally found. "I was just trying to make coffee," she admitted, her cheeks burning. "There is a machine for that," he said, walking past her. He pressed a button, and within seconds, a rich aroma filled the room. Claire watched silently, feeling the sharp contrast between her fumbling hands and his effortless command of everything around him. Breakfast was quiet. Claire nibbled at toast while Alexander scanned through his phone, seemingly lost in numbers and charts. The silence was suffocating, so she tried to make small talk. "I will go to the hospital later today. I want to see my mother before the surgery." Alexander did not look up. "The payment has already been processed. The hospital confirmed the procedure is scheduled for tomorrow morning. She will receive the best surgeons available." Her heart clenched with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. His eyes flicked to hers briefly, then back to the screen. "Do not thank me. You signed the contract. This is business." The words stung, though she knew they were true. She had promised herself she would not forget the nature of this arrangement. Still, a part of her longed to believe there might be more behind his coldness. Later that day, Claire began to notice the first of many adjustments she would have to make. A stylist arrived with racks of expensive clothing, insisting she try on dress after dress. "You will need to look the part," the woman said briskly, pinning fabric against Claire's frame. Claire felt like a doll being fitted for display. The clothes were beautiful, but none of them felt like her. That evening, she and Alexander attended a dinner with several of his business associates. It was her first time stepping into the public role of Mrs. Grant. The restaurant was filled with glittering chandeliers and the chatter of powerful men and women. Claire forced a smile, her hands trembling as she lifted a crystal glass of water. One of the women at the table leaned closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "So, this is the new Mrs. Grant. Where did he find you?" Heat rushed to Claire's cheeks. She wanted to vanish. Before she could stammer a reply, Alexander's voice cut through the air. "She is my wife," he said firmly, his arms slipping around Claire's chair. "That is all you need to know." The table fell silent. Claire stared at him in shock. For the first time, he had defended her, not as part of a contract, but with something that felt almost real. When they returned home, she could not hold back her question. "Why did you say that tonight? Why did you defend me?" Alexander loosened his tie, his expression unreadable. "Because you are my wife, and while this arrangement lasts, no one insults you without insulting me." His words were practical, logical, yet Claire's heart beat faster all the same. She lay awake long after he had retreated to his study, replaying the evening in her mind. This was supposed to be a cold arrangement, a contract signed in desperation, but with every glance, every unexpected kindness, the lines between business and something more began to blur. And deep down, Claire feared that her heart was no longer following the rules she had agreed to. The following week arrived with a new wave of challenges for Claire. Her mother's surgery had gone successfully, and though relief filled her heart, there was no time to rest. Being the wife of Alexander Grant meant stepping into a role she had never rehearsed for. Now, every moment outside their penthouse was a performance, and every performance carried the weight of scrutiny. On Friday evening, Alexander informed her that they would be attending a charity gala hosted by his family. "You will be introduced formally to everyone who matters," he explained as he adjusted his cuff links. "The press will be there. The photographs will circulate. Tonight, you must play the part perfectly." Claire's stomach tightened. She had worn borrowed gowns before for the sake of appearances, but this was different. The stylist had chosen a midnight blue dress that shimmered under the light, elegant and refined. A gown that belonged to someone who was used to applause and champagne, not to a waitress who had once counted pennies for a bus fare. When the car arrived at the grand hall, flashbulbs exploded the moment they stepped out. Claire blinked against the blinding light, forcing herself to hold Alexander's arm with practiced poise. His face remained perfectly composed, as if cameras were a natural extension of his life. She, on the other hand, felt every stare cutting into her, measuring her, silently questioning her worth. Inside the gala was a sea of glittering gowns, tailored suits, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Waiters carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet filled the air with soft music. Alexander guided her through the crowd, greeting board members, investors, and relatives with calm precision. Claire nodded politely, her smile strained, her palms damp beneath her clutch. Then came the inevitable. A tall woman with striking features approached, her tone dripping with familiarity. "Alexander," she purred, ignoring Claire entirely. "You never told me you had married." "This is my wife, Claire," Alexander said firmly, placing a steady hand on the small of Claire's back. The woman's eyes finally slid toward her, cool and dismissive. How unexpected. She gave a thin smile before turning back to Alexander. "We must catch up soon." Claire's chest tightened, but she kept her expression calm. She reminded herself that this was part of the contract. She was here to play the role, nothing more. Yet, when Alexander's arm tightened slightly against her back, it sent a confusing warmth through her chest. Later that evening, as they posed for photographs, the press shouted questions. "Mr. Grant, how long have you been married? Where did you two meet? Mrs. Grant, what charity causes are closest to your heart?" Claire froze for a split second, panic rising. But before she could stumble, Alexander answered smoothly, weaving a believable story about how they had met at a business dinner, how their connection had grown naturally. He spoke with such conviction that even Claire found herself almost believing it. As the evening drew to a close, they slipped into the car. Claire let out a long breath. Exhaustion etched on her face. "I nearly ruined everything tonight," she murmured. Alexander glanced at her. "You did not ruin anything. You managed well, considering you have never faced such a crowd before." She looked at him, surprised. That almost sounded like a compliment. A small smile tugged at his lips, though he quickly hid it. "Do not let it go to your head. We have a long year ahead, and you will need to get used to this." Claire leaned back against the seat, staring out at the passing city lights. For the first time since signing the contract, she realized that playing the role of Mrs. Grant would not simply be about appearances. It would mean enduring whispers, skepticism, and the constant reminder that she did not belong. Yet beneath all the tension, a strange thought took root. For a brief moment at the gala, when Alexander had defended her, when he had spoken for them both, as though they were truly united, she had felt something real. And that terrified her more than anything else, because this was supposed to be fake, and already her heart was betraying her. The days following the gala were quieter, but the tension between Claire and Alexander grew in ways neither of them wanted to admit. Their lives settled into a strange rhythm. During the day, Alexander was consumed by meetings and phone calls, while Claire tried to navigate her new role inside the enormous penthouse. She spent her mornings visiting her mother at the hospital, where the doctors praised her mother's progress after the surgery. Those visits reminded Claire why she had made the deal in the first place. But every night when she returned home, she was once again Mrs. Grant. Alexander expected her to attend dinners, pose at public functions, and accompany him to social gatherings where every eye seemed to watch them. At first, she told herself it was only acting. She would smile, hold his arm, and nod at the right moments. Yet somewhere along the way, the lines blurred. One evening after another dinner with investors, Claire slipped off her heels the moment they returned to the penthouse. "I do not know how you endure nights like that," she muttered, rubbing her sore feet. Alexander glanced at her, loosening his tie. "It is part of the life I lead. Appearances matter more than truth." She looked at him, her voice soft, but edged with honesty. "Maybe that is why people think you have no heart." The words hung between them, daring and sharp. She expected anger, maybe even a warning. Instead, Alexander studied her silently, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "And what do you think, Claire? Do you believe I have no heart?" Her breath caught. She wanted to say yes, to remind herself that he was cold and calculating, that their marriage was nothing more than ink on paper. But her memory betrayed her the way he had defended her at the gala, the way he had ensured her mother's care without hesitation. Slowly she shook her head. "I think you hide it. Maybe even from yourself." Something flickered in his eyes before he turned away, pouring himself a glass of water. "Careful," he murmured. "That sounds dangerously close to affection." Her cheeks warmed, but she said nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with questions neither dared to voice. As the weeks passed, Claire found herself noticing the small details about him. He preferred his coffee black with exactly 1 spoon of sugar. He always loosened his tie the moment he walked through the door. How his gaze softened almost imperceptibly whenever she mentioned her mother's recovery. And Alexander, in turn, began to notice her. He saw the way she bit her lip when she was nervous. The way she tried to hide her laughter behind her hand. The way she carried herself with quiet dignity, even when others tried to tear her down. The contract had been clear. No intimacy. No affection, no real connection. Yet the unspoken truth grew heavier with every shared glance and every late-night conversation. One night, as Claire stood by the window watching the city lights, Alexander joined her. The silence stretched until he finally said, "You are stronger than I expected." She turned to him, startled. That almost sounded like a compliment. This time, he did not hide his smile. Do not get used to it. But the warmth in his tone betrayed him, and Claire's heart betrayed her in return. She knew the danger of falling for him. Yet every day it became harder to deny. And somewhere deep inside, she feared what would happen when the year of their contract came to an end. Because by then her heart might already belong to him completely. The fragile balance between Claire and Alexander began to crack when whispers started circulating in the press. At first, it was harmless speculation, questions about their whirlwind marriage, curiosity about Claire's background. But soon, the tone shifted. One morning, as Claire entered the dining room, she found a glossy magazine spread open on the table. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Who is Mrs. Grant? From waitress to millionaire's wife in one night." The article was filled with details from her past, her job at the diner, her mother's illness, and even the eviction notice she had once received. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. How did they get all of this? She whispered. Alexander, seated at the head of the table, looked grim. They pay for information. People sell whatever scraps of gossip they can find. It is how this world works. Claire's voice cracked. They are painting me as a gold digger. They are saying I trapped you. He met her eyes steadily and unflinchingly. Do not let it rattle you. They will talk no matter what you do. But it did rattle her. Everywhere she went, she felt the eyes of strangers lingering a little too long, whispering when she passed. At the grocery store, she overheard a woman muttering, "That is her, the waitress who married rich." Claire's cheeks burned with shame, even though she knew the truth. The pressure only grew when Alexander's business rivals began to circle. At a shareholder meeting, one man sneered openly. "We need a leader who makes decisions with his head, not one distracted by a sham marriage to a girl from the streets." The words cut deeper than any tabloid headline. Claire sat silently beside Alexander, wishing she could disappear. After the meeting, she confronted him. "They're right. I am hurting your reputation. I should not be here." His jaw tightened. "Do not say that. You are my wife, Claire." Her eyes welled with tears. "But it is not real. None of this is real." For the first time, anger flashed in his gaze. "Do you think I would have chosen you if I did not believe you could stand by my side? Contract or not, you are mine." The intensity in his words both frightened and stirred her. She wanted to believe him, but the world outside their penthouse seemed determined to tear them apart. Days later, matters grew worse. A rival company leaked a photograph of the contract. Her signature scrolled across the page. Her fate was sealed in ink. The tabloids erupted, accusing her of being nothing more than a paid actress in Alexander's elaborate deception. Claire's world collapsed in an instant. She could not step outside without cameras flashing in her face, without strangers shouting cruel questions. Her mother, still recovering in the hospital, began receiving calls from reporters. Late one night, Claire sat alone in the darkened living room, her heart heavy with despair. Alexander found her there, her eyes red from crying. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "They know everything. The contract, the truth. I am ruining you." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his hands firm on her trembling ones. "Listen to me, Claire. They can print their lies. They can twist the truth. But they cannot decide what we are. Only we can." Her tears fell freely. "But what are we, Alexander? A contract? A deal? He hesitated, his grip tightening as if he feared losing her. For once, the man who always had an answer was silent. And in that silence, Claire realized the truth was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The world was ready to expose them, and their fragile connection was hanging by a thread. The storm broke the very next morning. Newspapers plastered the leaked contract across their front pages, and every headline screamed betrayal. Sam's marriage exposed, one declared. Waitress paid to be a millionaire's wife, shouted another. Claire sat frozen at the kitchen table, her fingers clutching the crumpled paper as if she could will the words to vanish. The world now knew everything. The whispers had turned into a roar. Alexander entered the room, his expression a mask of steel. "Do not read that garbage," he said, trying to snatch the paper from her hands. Her voice shook with fury and heartbreak. "It is not garbage, Alexander. It is the truth. They know about the contract. They know I never belonged here." He slammed the paper onto the counter, his composure breaking. "I told you before, what matters is what we decide, not them." Tears blurred her vision as she rose to her feet. "What we decide? It was never we, Alexander. It was you. You wrote the terms. You set the rules. And I was desperate enough to sign away my dignity." For a moment, silence stretched heavy between them. Only the sound of Claire's ragged breathing filled the air. Then she whispered the words she had been afraid to say aloud. "I cannot stay here anymore." His chest rose sharply as if her words had struck him like a physical blow. "Claire, do not do this." But she shook her head, her heart breaking with each syllable. "I cannot keep pretending. Not when the world sees me as a fraud, and not when I no longer know what is real between us." She turned before he could stop her, fleeing to the guest room where she stuffed clothes into a small bag. Alexander followed, his voice rough with desperation. Her tears fell harder. "That is the problem, Alexander. I do not know you at all. You hide behind contracts, behind power, behind that cold mask. I do not know if you ever cared about me or if I was just convenient." He reached for her arm, but she stepped back, clutching the bag like a shield. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Let me go." For the first time, Alexander's hand fell uselessly to his side. He watched as she walked out the door, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. When the silence returned, it was crushing. The penthouse that once felt like an untouchable fortress now felt hollow, stripped of its illusion of control. And for Alexander Grant, a man who had never allowed himself to lose, the absence of Claire was the first defeat that cut deeper than any business loss. Claire returned to her mother's small apartment, seeking comfort in the familiar walls she had once called home. The air smelled faintly of lavender detergent, and the peeling wallpaper was a sharp contrast to the glittering halls of Alexander's world. Yet in this simplicity, she felt safe, or at least she wanted to believe she was safe. But safety did not erase the ache in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's face, his hand falling helplessly to his side. As she walked away, she told herself it was the right choice, that the truth of the contract had poisoned whatever fragile bond they had shared. Still, her heart whispered doubts in the quiet of the night. Meanwhile, Alexander was unraveling. For years, he had built his empire on control, every move calculated, every risk managed. But Claire's absence left him restless, unable to focus, haunted by the echo of her voice. In meetings, he snapped at colleagues. At night, he poured himself drinks that did little to dull the gnawing emptiness. For the first time in his life, money and power meant nothing. Then came the board meeting that pushed him to the edge. One of his senior advisors smirked as he slid the leaked contract across the table. "This scandal is a liability. Step down, Alexander, before you drag the company down with you." Something inside him snapped. He slammed his hand on the table. "Do you think I built this empire just to watch it collapse because of your cowardice? Claire is my wife, and I will not let any of you insult her again." The room fell silent. His declaration was reckless, bold, and for once entirely from the heart. He walked out of that meeting with a clarity he had never felt before. He did not want a contract. He did not want appearances. He wanted Claire. That evening, Alexander appeared at the small apartment, his suit rumpled, his eyes tired but burning with determination. Claire opened the door, her breath catching at the sight of him. "You should not be here," she whispered. "I should have been here long ago," he replied, his voice raw. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, the very contract that had bound them together. Without hesitation, he tore it in half, then again, until the shreds fell to the floor. Claire stared stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because I do not want a contract," he said, stepping closer. "I do not want a fake wife or a year-long arrangement. I want you. Only you. Not because of what you signed, but because of who you are." Her eyes filled with tears, her heart warring between hope and fear. "And if the world never believes us, if they keep calling me a fraud..." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Then let them. I will spend every day proving to you and to them that what I feel for you is real." In that moment, the weight of lies and contracts began to lift, replaced by something fragile but true. For the first time, Alexander was not the man of power or the cold negotiator. He was simply a man in love, willing to risk everything to win her back. The following week, the world was still buzzing with headlines about the scandal, but Alexander no longer cared. For the first time, he refused to fight for control of the narrative. Instead, he chose to fight for Claire. On the morning of the company's annual charity event, reporters gathered outside the grand ballroom, eager for another spectacle. Rumors swirled that Alexander Grant would resign under pressure, that his so-called marriage had crumbled. Yet, when the doors opened, he walked in with Claire by his side, her hand firmly in his. The cameras erupted in flashes, questions flying through the air like arrows. "Is your marriage real? Did she marry you for money? Mr. Grant, are you stepping down?" Alexander raised a hand, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Enough. You want the truth? The contract was real. Yes, it existed, but it does not define us anymore. I tore it apart because my marriage to Claire is not a transaction. It is my choice and it is my heart." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's pulse raced as every eye turned to her. For a moment, she feared she would falter, but then she remembered the woman at the gala who had sneered at her, the magazines that had called her a fraud, and the doubts that had haunted her for weeks. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "I did not marry Alexander for money. I married him because I had no other choice. But somewhere along the way, I discovered that choice had become love, and I will not be ashamed of that." The room fell into silence, the weight of her words echoing louder than the click of cameras. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Claire gasped as he opened it, revealing a ring, not the cold, perfect diamond chosen for appearances, but a simple band engraved with their initials. He sank to one knee, his voice breaking with sincerity. "No contracts, no conditions. Claire, will you marry me for real this time?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." The ballroom erupted into applause, the cameras flashing like stars. But for Claire and Alexander, the world had faded away. In that moment, there were no boardrooms, no contracts, no scandals, only two people who had fought through lies and shadows to find something real. Later that night, as they walked hand in hand beneath the city lights, Claire glanced up at him with a smile. "Do you think they will ever stop doubting us?" Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "Let them doubt. We will give them a lifetime of proof." And for the first time since their lives had collided, Claire felt not the weight of desperation, but the lightness of hope. Their marriage had begun as a bargain, but it ended as a promise, one written not in ink, but in love.